So,
Virginia. Hello. Hi,
hello,
everyone.
welcome.
I'm
Uh,
Robyn. And
I'm
I'm
Stephen.
pointing the wrong way because I still do not get how these cameras work.
No.
Um,
I'm not Robin. I am Robin. I'm a Robinson, but not
yes.
Robin. And yeah, but when you guys joined, Robin and I were just clarifying what state is which. So I mistakenly said Georgia, but what I meant was Virginia,
Virginia.
and you
It's
just
okay. I'm geographically screwed up. I once spent my mom and I once spent like 5 minutes trying to figure out where the state of Omaha was. So
but tell us about Virginia and how you get what you vote for,
well,
and
they
then
voted for Glenn Youngkin and now ban uh they're banning critical race theory despite the fact that they cannot define it. And they're banning any restrictions having to do with COVID. So, congratulations, you're going to be sick and racist.
well, and I think there's this liberal, this democratic mistake to be like, these people were clearly conned. They didn't know what they were voting. I mean, he was
They knew
barely
exactly what they were
straightforward.
voting for.
This is what they wanted, and we're talking, and this will come up later when we talk about the midterms and so forth. But I had a bit of a tantrum on Twitter about this because again, someone had the whole thing of like these purity people want their ponies and they didn't show up, and I was like, I don't look. I am not an unreasonable person. I don't think if
Yeah.
the reason the past 12 years happened was because of black people, disgruntled black people, and whiny young people, those get off my yawn and liberal leftists staying home or voting for Nader or Jill Stein was why we got routed in 2010, 2014, and 2016. I would be the first, but that's only part of the, just like what we saw in Virginia, the exit
Yeah.
polls don't lie. Biden voters, so white suburban moderates, the people that Terry McAuliffe was going to appeal to,
Mm-hmm.
the people Hillary Clinton openly appealed to by saying, "Well, here's my good billionaire to speak at
Yeah.
the Bloomberg to speak at the convention," and in 2010, and by bipartisanship, and 20 for these people who we actually were appealing to rejected Democrats and get a whole swing. I mean, young, no, leftists staying home and like was not why some blue dog got slaughtered in 2010 in a very red district or purple district. It was white moderates. You look at leading up to the shellacking,
Yeah.
that's what happened. And so that's what happened here. And it was very clearly targeted towards that group. And there was this perception that Virginia could not be lost because those people would never, you know, Trump. And it just didn't work. And he was like, yeah, well, here's what I'm going to do. And that's what they seem to
I
want.
mean, this is the thing. Given the choice between a real Republican and a fake Republican, the real Republican usually tends to win. Like, I don't think I've seen many cases where like the opposite has happened. So, I'm not saying you have to give everyone ponies, but you might need to like offer something a little different. I don't know, other than like what that guy says, but not so much. Like,
Well, it doesn't even work amongst Republicans. So I just don't
yeah.
understand. Like, it's something that is clearly field tested, if you know what I mean, Robin. So
Mhm.
they have with Republican primaries. So in 2016, the 2010 Tea Party, like people were laughing. What? Mike Lee's not going to defeat this long time conservative who has
Yeah.
more conservative bona fides because they define conservative by their Ivy League terms. And he has more conservative bona fides. Mike Lee's running on getting rid of the IRS. That's not going to
Yeah.
happen. So how can he beat him? But he did. And same Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the entire Republican establishment backs the less crazy person who they and loses. So it's just it's
Yeah.
field tested to what you're saying. Like you can't beat the person that way. But I felt like in Virginia, it seemed as if McCullough completely ignored the anger that was there, the issue that was there. You had a whole year.
Well, I think it's, purposeful because they don't, they feel like they don't do well with angry.
Mm-hmm.
And they're worried that angry scares people. So they want to like not tap into that at all, but also not tapping into like, as a result, you end up not tapping into any emotion at all. And people are like, I could give or take. So it's a fine line they're walking, should they choose to walk it.
Well, it's just a sense of if you look at his, and you detailed this in your post today, he doesn't be like, okay, here's my non-divisive, because Democrats are afraid of being divisive, but even if they won on those things, and it's not like, here's my non-divisive. It's like, no, here's what I campaigned on. I'm going to deliver it in my executive orders. And yes, they are divisive, but I'm going to presume, and Republicans do this a lot, I'm going to just presume that the right people, not just that sensible people only agree with me, but like the right people agree with me, and we're going to move forward. And so, that's what occurred. And I didn't think that the Virginia route would occur per se. I was somewhat until, McCullough being the winner I started to get a little concerned, obviously, and his campaign concerned me. But I was certainly sounding alarm bells because Northam was doing correct things for COVID, but there was pushback against them. There was a sense of anger, and the school closures were anger. And again, as you're saying, Democrats often do well with anger. There's presumption that this is the right thing to do, which I can approve of if you have a strategy for it. But sometimes it's kind of like, it's the right thing to do and no reasonable person disagrees with it. There'll often be the downplaying of it. Like sometimes we've seen this in circles where it'll be, oh, those were AstroTurf protests.
Yeah.
Going back to the Tea Party, those aren't real protests. It's like, I don't know. I think they might be reflecting something occurring. And that gets.
And even if they are AstroTurf protests, like clearly those people exist,
And then they will vote.
I hate going that route because it's the same thing they do with us, where they're like, they're all paid by George Soros. Like, it's weird to think that other people have to be paid to disagree with you.
Yes, it's a very arrogant.
And this is my thing. The way that I've lived my life, people have always disagreed with me, so I've never been surprised by it or like, what? You think I'm like a crazy communist? This is brand new information. No, like I'm very, where I grew up, everyone was very conservative. I'm probably far to the left of most liberals even. So I'm used to people telling me that I'm wrong and disagreeing with me. I'm never like, oh man, you must be paid. Are you like a Russian bot or something? Are you, AstroTurfed and paid by the Koch brothers? No, clearly people exist who disagree with me. It's not that hard.
Yeah, I get that a lot. I tweeted something and someone had responded, well, I block Russian bots who spread misinformation. One more of these misinformation posts, sort of putting me on notice, and I just then went ahead and blocked the person because it's like, I'll preemptively block you because I will probably annoy you again. So you don't need to put me, stranger I don't know, policing my timeline. I don't need to put me in timeout. But yes, there was a sense of everyone saying something was a coordinated effort, and it's a lot of paranoia. I tend to think the simplest explanation is the most logical one. But yes, it's one of the, obviously, and this is Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. We're all talk of the views of conservatives long have of twisting his words.
The one thing he ever said.
Yes,
about racism. Everything else was about gardening.
Yes, exactly. The one direct address, which is sort of, the direct address of change and confrontation of change, and being very aware. I mean, he wrote, like, it wasn't just let's ignore race. He was just very clear that government has clearly favored white people to the detriment of Black people. I think he had a famous quote, because white people don't talk about it much, of just how the Constitution had the 3/5 rule, which made Black people 60% of a person. But now we're half of a person because we get, half of the income, half of our housing crisis, and that's only the good things, and we get double the negative, so we die twice as much and so all of this now, if you have these conversations that he was having about race and income inequality, which is again, I think, inconvenient to people from moderates, Republican or Democrat, and like when he talked about clear racial inequality, income inequality, and almost what we consider socialist arguments are clearly redistribution efforts to make a difference. It was directly about race exists. This country has been racist, is racist, and systemically needs to change. And he wasn't. I think people are still shocked about that, but I mean, again, that no one will learn about it, and it's that weird reality where if America wasn't racist, so there's this whole 1619 backlash, which the idea that, and I say this as my writer head, the idea that everything doesn't go back to 1619 is really all about 1776 and are we still having arguments about drinking tea and to drive on? Is that the fundamental, there's no real, you think about what fundamental, even monarchy, people love the crown.
People are fine with that.
There's no that was an issue and it moved on, but it wasn't the fundamental driving element from 1619 to everything from legislation, the compromise, to every war, ultimately, even with expansion into the native territories, white supremacy, slavery, all of this was the key theme. That's what this movie is about, not about the British. We don't.
The redcoats are not coming. They haven't been coming for a while now.
Yes. The Civil War, the nation did not almost split apart because at a certain point, someone's like, no, I still want my British accent. Let's go back. Oh my God, my children are talking right. This is wrong. You've got to go back. There was that's not what happened. It was really, this is what's happening. And so that it is not surprising, but it's astonishing that is what there's this huge, the fact that okay, well, we don't necessarily agree with some of the conclusions that was made in the 1619 project, but we fundamentally disagree with the idea that slavery's played a big role or that, racism is an issue. It's really sort of absurd. And then it's compounded every Martin Luther King Day, because then it's just well, if America really wasn't horrifically, horribly racist and during King's time, during the Civil Rights Movement, and what King and John Lewis achieved, why are we celebrating it? If it was just that only a few guys named Bubba were jerks, and it wasn't a systemic issue, then really we're getting people, well, not us, but people are getting a day off because this one guy gave a speech is absurd.
Can we all why doesn't, if that one speech or one phrase gets you a federal holiday, why not give one to every single Miss America ever?
Exactly. Everyone should quote that. Miss America, I think she said she believed in world
she wanted world peace.
Whitney Houston believed children are the future.
But
and
Houston.
And also
that, I would actually completely support that, by the way. I do think that we should get Whitney Houston's birthday off as a national holiday.
I adore Whitney Houston. The twisting of that quote, which is interesting, we always mention that. It was also, you want to ask the Republicans, okay, well, why, obviously that must have been, isn't that itself controversial? It is, isn't it somewhat, it was at the time, had to be notable. He mentioned it in the speech of the idea someday, not yet, but someday will be judged this way. And the country is almost more than 100 years old at this point. And, and you have wait a minute, wasn't that in the Declaration of Independence? Or wasn't that in, if he's making this point and it's making this is supposed to be otherwise it's just kind of saying something is used it's a well duh statement and no one gets a day for a well duh statement. Or like giving away, like no one like every time celebrates, oh, here's this, let's celebrate Oasis. It's like, well, what about the Beatles? I mean, that's okay. That's Wonderwall. It's fine and all, but
Yeah.
you know,
But like, the thing is, the way that they always apply it is to white people. They're like, why aren't these white people being judged by the content of their character instead of the color of their skin? And that's always what they're talking about.
oh yes.
They're never talking about like anyone else being judged by the content of their character. They're always worried about white people not being judged by the content of their character, which, you know, they usually are.
Oh yeah. Well,
Sometimes
I think
that character, however, is bad.
well, there's a fundamental, so for white people, and I think white men in general, I think, and this is what these critical race studies and these when students, the person crying about beloved or whatever,
Yeah.
I think this gets to, because in the good old days when we were in school, you sometimes would sit there and be like, well, I guess no one like me did anything or was important.
Yeah.
I'm not important. It was as you were a black kid, you're kind of sitting, I guess I didn't really do anything. I didn't really, you know, I'm not part of this. Your woman, yeah. Founding fathers, women is stupid. Like, I guess we didn't do anything. Yeah. You know, they didn't talk, like we weren't important. It's always all great white men, white men, and it's this wonderful thing. But when you actually teach the history, if you're in your, then it's like, oh well, I mean, owning someone, that sucks. Oh my God, I don't want to do that. And like being mean to women and being mean to the, like if you're a human being, if you're a small child and have empathy, you're going to feel guilty about this somehow, not like just based on race, but and perhaps not even that. What they're getting at is the sense of no longer feeling, it's actually dismantling this inherent white supremacy. So you go out of school believing, I'm going to go now write for the National Review and believe white men are great and should be running things forever. And maybe this will dismantle that. Like if I get real history, I won't be Charlie Kirk. I won't have this tremendous sense of.
But they want to preserve the Charlie Kirks. Like that's
what
like, it's like save the Kirks.
Save the sense of entitlement, like the or Ben Shapiro, like the whole.
Well, they're afraid of those people going away because they don't want to be lonely.
Men like me.
I swear to God, I think that's part of it.
Oh yeah, they feel this, you know, this shame, and you know what kind of when Megyn Kelly lost her job, the whole the blackface thing, and often people talk about being canceled. I am an empathetic and you've been this way as well. It's like, well, just because someone did something or tweeted a ridiculous thing 2 years ago, should you lose their show now? And so they come out, say they're sorry, fine, even if it's some horrible sexist statement he made. People are stupid, acknowledge that, right? Like, but what bothers me, which makes me less sympathetic, is when folks refuse to learn. So just like, you know, I appreciate when I saw The Celluloid Closet and as a stupid, you know, average homophobic, because if you don't know gay, if you grow up around gay people, only means you're going to be homophobic. It's like if you don't grow up around black people, how are you going to be racist? No one hates that. People hate that. They want to believe that the only way you can be racist, homophobic, and sexist is to literally go to the Harvard school of those and then get a degree and there's a diploma and here's your hood. And then you go off. But otherwise, it's just like, I'm not proud. I mean, I'm Lauren Bobart. I am obviously not qualified to be a racist. I take any of these courses. But you know, as an average homophobic kid, and as ladies listening to Eddie Murphy routines about gay people, and you watch, but you see The Celluloid Closet and you see the humanity, you see like the history of the media messaging or whatever, but now you have right-wingers saying, oh, that's indoctrination, if they were to see that, or they were to like learn about other people and learn about, oh, this is why you know, this is what women go through. So when you are when you talk over a woman or you do this to a woman, it's like, I don't want to hear all of that. I just want to do it. And then later when you're, you know, about to lose your job because of sexual harassment, because you thought it was funny to make a fat joke about a woman during a meeting,
Yeah.
because all you did was watch old TV sitcoms. That's fun. And you've missed like an entire history of feminist thought and theory that's been out there and taught.
Mhm.
Why should I ever learn that? And don't indoctrinate me. Then you're like, oh no, I'm being canceled. It's like, well, we live in a world where everyone,
like
everyone's been trying to educate
yeah.
you. Like Megyn Kelly, like we were trying to educate you about blackface. And then later she's like, I'm pulling my kids out of school, public school in New York, because they're learning all about white supremacy. Okay, so then they're going to show up somewhere in
their work, and so yes,
because they don't, they live in you're not educating them. I'm sure if they ask, why did you lose your job? So it's a very it's impossible for me to feel sympathy for people who want to remain willfully ignorant.
What you don't understand is people who are so afraid of feeling guilty. Like, now, granted, I'm coming at this from like Catholics on both sides, but like, guilt is important. People should feel guilty. Like, you should feel like, if you see something, if something unfortunate happens to someone and something fortunate happens to you, you should feel guilty. Like, you should, like, not guilty, but like, yes, guilty. Like, it's weird to not feel guilt.
Yeah, that's a human. That's like, what having
that's a human emotion. It exists for
a human soul. That's why when my boy Angel gets his soul back and he sits there, it's like, oh my God, what have I been doing? Because you were
like, how do you grow as a person without any sense of guilt? Or like, oh my God, I, may have contributed to this. I may have hurt someone. Like, God, I'm an atheist, and yet I still like the crushing guilt always, all of the time. Like, that's just, how you live your life, as far as I know. But
it also is part of that inherent individualism, right? The sense of not sort of conservatives don't want, but although they want to be,
I'm never responsible for anyone else, which you are.
But they want to feel all of the Borg, all of one collective, when it talks about the entire history of America and America being awesome and a beacon. Because if you didn't do that, if you're like, some other countries don't bang that drum, right?
Yeah.
Then it's like, okay, well, fine. But they want to be like, they want to preserve that myth. So they want to preserve a false history of America, from the cherry tree to Jefferson not owning people. And actually, he had a great romance, the woman he raped, children who had, and they literally released the movie Jefferson in Paris with Nick Nolte and whatever. It was a similar concept of that horrible kind of justification for what had occurred. And people want to believe these lies
because it makes them feel better for some reason that I actually do not understand. Like, I don't understand why that would make you feel better. Like, we all don't like finding out that like the people we admire were crap people, but it happens, and you can still like the stuff they did. It's
it's a collection of the idea of, also, we're America. America has to be wonderful and beautiful. It's essentially a narcissism. And so the 1619 Project reaction to it seems crazy unless you view it as a narcissist responding to narcissistic injury.
Yeah.
So if you've ever offended a narcissist who their inflated self-worth and they rain hell on you, it's like, well, that's how they go.
It's like when you tell a narcissist that they hurt your feelings and they're like, why are you attacking me?
Yes. And that's fascinating, because it's like the psychopath is very, especially when I write characters, it's very kind of roots. Psychopath is more of like, who cares? Like, you hurt me and you did this to me and whatever. Psychopaths are like, so. And whereas a narcissist is more inclined to be, and some of our sociopaths or narcissists are to be more of like, you hurt me in a fundamental way of my belief, my self-image in the world.
Yeah.
And
because I'm supposed to be a good person. And if you say I hurt your feelings, then I'm not a good person, and so you're bad.
Yes. And so it's and in America, America's belief in itself and its fundamental belief in itself has to preserve this, and someone has to be like, okay, for the rest of the world, this you're attacking our sense. That's the worst thing to ever be, and that's terrible. And so now it's like everyone who always says this, we have to attack, and there's a whole industry for this. That's why the whole critical race theory, there was so much power for that, and this belief that their children are being attacked. How much of that do you think was related also to legitimate, which I would say bipartisan consensus, though people don't want to believe this, between the backlash of schools closings or school shutdowns?
I do think that there was a little bit of that, honestly, because I do think that, there needs to be more acknowledgement of the fact that not everyone has the ability to like have their kids at home all the time. And, that has been, fairly ignored in the, people just going like, well, no, just like stay home and type. But like, not everyone can do that. And people are either like to leave their kids at home or, give their kids food. And I think that like there needs to be some sort of, we got to make it possible for people to do that if we're going to, keep their kids home from school.
Yes. And unfortunately, obviously, the Republicans are not going to be part of any solution to that end. So you have to, I think what's interesting, I think a lot of these critical race panic, as you would call it, stories often resulted in parents hearing what their children were learning in school.
Yeah.
And I was talking about this to my wife. There is a sense of, often if you look at, I say, something as silly as He-Man or other cartoons where we talk about what we consider certain liberal traits about being kind to others or whatever is done in usually a very straightforward kind of way, that if an average parent walks by a teacher talking about some sort of more message from G.I. Joe, they'd be like, whatever. But I do think there's been over time this over academization of these issues. And what happens is that then they wind up hearing like crazy stuff like, feeling part of some kind of weird language. And so what is my child hearing, or what is my child being part of? So and I think that is what people were observing, and then it went nuts.
Well, I mean, I think, there's a whole idea of future shock. People get freaked out when they feel like they're being left behind. And I do think that that's a very, very big part of it. It's like, it's weird because they do teach this now, and, we don't like Cosby now, but the episode of the Cosbys where Vanessa is explaining new math to Dr. Huxtable, and he's just like, I am a doctor and have no idea what the hell you're talking about. And that is the kind of math they do now. They stopped it for a while, I guess, and then brought it back. But like, he's all freaked out, because of that. And then, someone told me also you can't roofie people. So then he was talking about that. But like, people get very comfortable being who they are. And then when, in their minds, like, oh, this person's throwing a wrench into who I am. They're taking away my, they're taking away my one joke that I have, that like, and now that's not funny anymore. They're taking away, a world that I understand. And I think that's a very, very big part of it, because people are like, oh, my kids are going to like, it's one thing if your kids are like listening to like crazy kid music that you don't get, and they're TikToking and wearing Crocs, which is what the kids do now. Playing Pogs. They don't play Pogs anymore. It's one thing to not relate on that level, but then when like to not relate on an intellectual level, I think is probably even more difficult. Hello. So cute.
Well, thank you. I have a hungry child. but yes, I was actually reviewing the Cosby documentary and watching part of it, and it's that Kamau Bell is doing, and it's really good and putting in a perspective of, we actually thought this guy, he was actually quite twisted always. This goes back to the psychopathic narcissism thing of like, yes, well, if you wish to exploit women with impunity and power, you want to present this image of yourself to sort of do it. So you can't really separate Dr. Huxtable from the monster, because Dr. Huxtable was only there to help the monster do what he was doing. Like that's how he was able to, because otherwise, if you're generally speaking,
and it's unsettling.
Yes, it is unsettling.
Yeah, and this is the thing, like people didn't want Bill Cosby being taken away from them.
Oh yes,
and that is, in that same vein. I think like people are like, the things I like are being taken away from me.
Well, that's what things of canceling. Like I can't enjoy it purely, and I think it's tough. I mean, for me, it's like, well, here's some of my favorite writers and authors. I knew they hated me. I knew they wouldn't think much of me. I had to kind of create that,
distance. Yeah.
Or even when you're reading some of this stuff, it's like, oh, here's the racist passage. Oh well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's played with sexism as well. For certain authors.
Yeah, I tried to get into the beats and stuff in high school, and I was like, you know what? I actually just can't do this, because all the cute boys at that time, so embarrassing, were really into like Charles Bukowski and shit. And I was like, I will be into that too. I'm going to be a cool girl. And then I was like, this is actually terrible. I am not finishing this book, but I digress.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's all similar. There's a sense of not wanting this taken from you. So critical race theory. So it's not so much that you believe that these white kids are being brainwashed or whatever. We're just believing like what we believe is right or moral or just is being taken from us. And it's a different, we're viewing the world in a different way that I no longer control.
And people don't like thinking that the world was biased to be fair towards them, because no one thinks their life has been fair.
Yeah. I don't, when I talk about what I would call some rake stepping incidents that the Democratic Party has had, and so with Virginia, they're almost like, well, what can we do there? We couldn't keep the school, schools open, or we couldn't, these things. Well, the idea is like, and this goes back to Occupy Wall Street. People are irrationally upset. And I saw this online somewhere. It's like, okay, well, if voters are upset, what they need to do is document why they're upset, why they think a Democrat could have fixed it, how a Republican could have made it better. And only if they could show their work, dot all the T's, will I even consider it relevant. And I'm like, okay, well, dude, voters can have the great power of saying, fuck you sideways, right? Yeah. Like if you don't care, or pretend to care, or say that they're worried about something else, or too glib. I mean, it does concern me where people get more excited by Jen Psaki doing, Psaki bombs, what do you say, whatever, that doesn't get you victory. Like, I mean, Democrats love showing the clip of "You're no Jack Kennedy," and it's like, oh yes, that was the ultimate dunk in a. That gave us Vice President Benson and later the Benson administration. And no, like Quayle won in the way that mattered. So yes, like you made him look silly, but then he won that election. So I do think this sense of
no more Burns. Like I feel like there's been an over focus on Burns.
Yeah.
Like, just across the board anyway. And less Burns, more salves.
Well, voters want to know how you can fix their problems, and they call it Green Lantern theory. But look, if a voter if you go to the doctor for any problem and whatever, and they're like, okay, well, Robyn, how would you think I fix this?
Yeah.
How do you think? Well, you come up with some ideas to fix your terminal cancer because I'm out of I only can do so much. Can you get me some more?
Yeah.
Can you get me some more nurses here or something? I was like, well, I don't. What? Like, okay. And so I think that's been the core of the issue. It is very tough right now. You have an opposition party that is fundamentally focused through deceit and lies to defeat you.
Yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't build bridges with them. Maybe you shouldn't try to make your signature legislation for the year a bipartisan deal with people who then will later say, Romney, the people you had up there, that included Mitt Romney and Susan Collins, that will later say, what? There's no problem. Democrats are just trying to take over the federal elections.
Yeah.
It's like, so you've already elevated them as reasonable, and then now they can come and say that your concerns are unreasonable. What did you gain from this? I mean, and I've been hit on this for a while, but I was like, okay, well, I don't trust McConnell. I think you're walking into a trap with McConnell when you are passing anything with his approval. Because then what happens is where we are now, right? Where Democrats are saying, well, oh my God, you've got to vote for us. The Republicans are the worst, evil, terrible people in the world. And here's a signature legislation that Mitch McConnell approved. And he's going to have people running on the Glenn Youngkin thing of saying, oh yeah, I'll vote for roads, bridges. We're reasonable Republicans, and liberals would have done something crazy like, universal daycare. And if you can't distinguish, and Democrats hate this whenever someone says like, well, a lot of voters, they can't distinguish between the two parties. How can they do? The one's fascist, one evil, and whatever. And even though that reductive response might make sense to us, but not to the average voter they need. When that happens, it's like, okay, well, why would you, if you want to ultimately make this discussion, to me, it would be like, I want to show after 2 years, even if it's on a party line basis, perhaps even especially on a party line basis, this is what Democrats can do while in power. What the bipartisan bill that you had your cinemas and mansions on TV advocating for, it's like, okay, well, if Mitt Romney likes that, well, does that mean that Mitt Romney and if Mitch McConnell, if Romney were president and McConnell were head of the Senate, I would still get the roads and bridges, you're saying, right? So what's the difference? And it's like, oh, well, fascism, it's like, okay, well, you need to be consistent with that message. And it winds up being,
and they also, it's the presenting things as better when Republicans also like them. Like, well, this must be good because Republicans like it even, which I think is like a weird standard, I guess. Like, I wouldn't go with that as a standard because
Republicans don't have that. They did not run on that, and even reasonable Republicans. Paul Ryan did not run on that, but Paul Ryan has the benefit of being perceived as reasonable, even though he is essentially equivalent to Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, and that is there essentially as far right. He's probably even more right than they are of the left and what they were pushing forward. And he was able to kind of go on TV and smile. Here's what I'm doing, and like, okay, and you have his agenda, his tax scam.
People thought he was good looking, which I still don't. That is one thing I do not get. The Paul Ryan swoon brigade.
He was, Alex P. Keaton, I guess, without charm or whatever. I don't know.
Hard pass. Hardest pass.
But yeah, I mean, the attack is usually on very engaged, to ideas that the complaints will be that liberals, I'm not staying home. I voted at every election since almost 30 year, my 30-year career of voting this year. And I have voted for but I voted for Clinton, but then I voted for the folks who lost in 94. And then, so my showing up actually is important because we all show up, but it's actually not determinative. Probably the same with you, probably the same with a lot of the people who get, hit on about, this or somehow depressing the vote. Ultimately what happens is there are profoundly unideological voters who really just kind of like, okay, well, who's achieving anything? Who's doing anything? And Republicans saw very early on that when people like Obama and then Biden are running not so much on, we're going to steamroll you guys and get what we want, just sort of the Trump and Cruz standpoint, because that you can do, right? Because then it's all about power. But here it's like we're going to woo and get bipartisan consensus, and then you are essentially putting your fate, your agenda in the hands of the other party, because all they have to do is say, yeah, no, fuck you. And then it looks like you are unable to deliver. Okay, well, people are still fighting. Government's still broken. So it must be these guys who are responsible. And then like, well, why can't people understand that it's not? It's like, well, you ran on this, and Elizabeth Warren and others were telling you that is a sucker's game back in 2019 or 2020, and that is actually what frustrates me, because I knew I was never a fan. I'm not a Green Lantern's ring person. I know that there's limits to what you can achieve as president, though I do warn that making it look as if Biden's so helpless. There's only so much you can do as president. Oh my God, 2024, Trump might become president again, and then we're all gonna die. Yeah. But you just said there's only so much.
Well, because this is the thing: Republicans are allowed to actually get things done that they want. Democrats are not. Like it's basically like.
And how this works. I disagreed with Sanders and others who said that there's somehow you'd get universal health care if you went to Kentucky and had a rally. McConnell's not going to care. He's still going to block you. He's evil. You need to get as much many votes. Republicans are inherently unmoved, but they don't care what their voters say. They will lie to their voters. And that's in a way why Manchin and Sinema are the most Republican thing about them, is how they say they're speaking for their constituents when it's a clear lie. Like it's like, well, the people of Arizona sent me here to do. No, they didn't. Like but it doesn't matter. She just will. It's the Republican lie.
Yeah.
But when Biden says I can work across all and get Republicans to work with me, and that's why you should vote for me instead of
that's bringing to the table.
And that's what you should vote for me instead of Liz Warren. That's almost a direct quote from late 2019, which was briefly in the polls. That was why, and then you don't deliver. Of course, people are going, and again, it's not me. What's going to happen? It's ultimately the young Black voter or the single mom, white mom in Ohio who's just going to be like, well, I got nothing out of this. I'm going to stay home. And it's like, oh, well, defy that voter suppression, stay in line for 12 hours. It's like, well, again, you understand, but you apparently don't. When you were talking about having the school debate, I have a child. Like I literally can't be in line, and I have to work because my Republican boss is not going to give me the day off to vote against his self-interest. So, I mean, the suppression will literally, it's not about, well, people can stay in, and I've seen this. Well, if you can stay in line for Coachella tickets, it's like, okay, well, you actually don't canvass anyone ever because you suck at communicating with voters, and you're just an arrogant jerk and don't get why this world of hurt is about to come. Because you're not, I mean, people mention 1984 a lot, but something I found interesting in that was how the true oppression, the focus of the oppression was often on what would amount to a relatively well-educated middle class. Like even Winston Smith, you get the impression if you read that he's probably would have been in our standards middle class, because the desperately poor people literally don't notice that the world is fundamentally they wouldn't notice that now Oceania is a horrible nightmare state compared to whatever was before. They were living in gutters already. So they never really, the fascists don't really care too much about the desperately poor. It's just those folks who can notice just enough to maybe, okay, well, someone can help me, someone can do something. And if you don't, then they just sort of either give up or for someone else. And I think we haven't kind of realized a sense of you need to give them a reason to do so. And again, it's not about ponies or like, why can't you do anything? It's just human nature. And but what did you, the past week, your thoughts on this this debate with voting rights and the filibuster, it was a known issue with Manchin and Sinema. We knew this.
I mean, I never expected either of them to change, really. I really didn't, because I don't know. I guess I'm a pessimist in certain ways. I didn't expect it. Like, honestly, I'm not gonna lie. I slept through most of that literally because I may have had COVID. I don't know. I couldn't get a test. I got a test today. So I was just sleeping straight through all of that and had to catch up later. But no, I'm not. Zero surprises there.
Yeah.
Zero surprises.
Well, I think the discussion, the debate there is more of, well, what did you expect? Biden had to go and make his big speech that then Sinema would go and make a fool out of him on. And a lot of these, I would say centrists in this case, the Trust Black Women Brigade, interestingly enough, quickly turned against Black women, including Abrams and prominent Black voting rights activists in Georgia who were like, I'm not coming to the speech because it's bullshit. And, and they were like, how dare they stump the president or whatever. It's like, or you could listen or believe Black. Oh, I guess you don't in this case. But
well, this is the thing. They vote like Black women as long as Black women vote exactly like upper middle class white men.
Yes.
That's when they vote like Black women.
Yes, but no differently.
But only those specific Black women who vote like I do.
But, I mean, Stacey Abrams was kind of, I would imagine from Stacey Abrams, it was like, okay, I don't have time for your speech because I've got to try to win in November 22 with insane voter suppression things against me that I know this trifling, as Ayanna Pressley said, this trifling senator in Arizona is not going to help. Like, I don't have time for the speech. I literally got to go and try to figure out like which hoops to jump or whatever to get enough people registered to even have a chance and figure out what arcane voting rules like. And that's what happened, right? After this, Sinema, and we have to go and make them irrelevant and go those states, some of which Biden lost at the peak of his popularity, but with his low, his below average approval rating, we've got to flip those states, go do it. So that's work. I don't have time. I think we've all had jobs like that, right? Yeah. Where the boss comes in and wants to give some big, speech or motivations, some Crispin's Day speech. And it's like, dude, we don't have time for this. We've got to actually do the work. You're going to leave this and go to your country club. And you think that somehow, because you took a management training class, that showing up and giving the speech and like, rah, 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 gets us motivated. It's like, no, that's just an hour you took from us to get this done. Like, we need to actually be focused on doing it. And so there, that's how I viewed it. It's like, what a waste of time this was. And it's like, well, what else we do? It's not green. He doesn't have a green lantern ring to make Manchin and Sinema do what he wants. It's like, okay, well, then why was he promised? Why did he say he was going to deliver some things better than Warren and even Harris because of his connections in the Senate? They are useless. He might as well have not served. They've laughed in his face. And if he couldn't, there's nothing he could do with these two folks. That's fine. Though I will say, when you have two prominent Democrats spitting in the face of your biggest, the people you said you're going to have the back of when on election speech, that's bad. Like, it's bad when they are resistant. And when Sinema is giving, and I'm mentioning it as a King Day post, is giving literally arguments that white moderates gave against King and against her buddy John Lewis about, don't march or don't make a scene and try to take your time and try to convince people who, generally if someone doesn't want you to eat in a lunch counter with them, they are so irrational. I don't think there's a conversation. Like, it would just come up of like, so I know that you've been lynching everyone who's been like sitting, but Robyn, if I could just, it's like, I would really love a hamburger. Oh, you just want a hamburger.
Said that.
It's really, what have I been thinking? What a great moment. And so
you just wanted a chocolate phosphate? Oh, well.
Oh, come on in. There we go. And now it's Pleasantville. But like the fact that, she's spitting in the face of, Black Americans, Black people's voting rights, saying that we could only have the rights that Mitch McConnell will give us, that other white people actively opposed to us are willing to give us. Will she even support us? Is a terrible message. And people have said, oh, well, go yell at the Republicans who, I'm like, okay, we elect Democrats to stop Republicans. So generally the
Republicans aren't going to listen to us because we don't vote for them. It's not like
well, yes,
if you have no leverage.
I gave a lot of money.
Also, sometimes we're not even in their states. Like, what am I going to do? Like, go to Lisa Murkowski and be like, listen.
Democrats gave a lot of money to Sinema.
Voting rights. I am not voting for you in the next Alaska election.
I mean, these people gave a lot of money to Sinema. They didn't give any money to. It's just sort of like if you buy a very expensive home security system from me, and it doesn't work, and there's like axe murderers at your door, and you call up, it's like, Steven, this thing didn't work at all. Oh my God. And I'm like, lady, why are you hassling me about this?
Why
is the problem truly the axe murderers? If there were no axe murderers, you would have no problem. And you probably wouldn't have spent so much money on my very expensive home security system, but that's a discussion for another time. Goodbye. And so obviously, I mean, we have to at least acknowledge that if you're going to now say we need to overcome Stacey Abrams, who you loved, and every white woman in the world had that little photo of her, and it's a badass photo. She's doing this thing. She's got awesome. She's got that badass photo of her. They've got that on her Instagram. There's no white woman. If you find a white woman, she's either a Trump who does not have it. She's like a Trump supporter or an alien who hasn't figured out that that's what you need to do to pose. But like generally, and probably not you, but because you don't do trends. But it seems
I'm not cool.
Yeah. It seems like everyone has that, but then it's like, okay, well, she's got to, save us again, Stacey. Those save the world, Stacey posts. Okay, so you want her to do that again, all of that.
I always get scared when people get like that about any woman, because you know, the second they're all like, save me, that other shoe is coming down eventually. Oh, yeah. They screw up once.
Exactly. So she's got to save, which if she succeeds, imagine if all these Black women do the work and succeed and overcome voter suppression, like, no, Connor Lamb's not going to vote to overturn the filibuster unless there are circumstances. Then it's like, oh, well, we don't need to break the Senate rule. We were able to do this. No one's going to make a controversial. Mitch McConnell has said, and I hate to quote the guy, but he's right because he's evil. But like, no one ever votes for you as no one after it's a thank you. It's like, you have to deliver before that, saying we're not going to vote for you until you come in for us, because no politician delivers a thank you and says like, okay, sure, we're going to help you now that you've gotten us in power. It just very rarely happens. So his this idea that trying to like build up, overcome everything, fine, but it would have been really nice. People started to say like, okay, well, what should we have done? Okay, if we're going to try to make Manchin and Sinema redundant, maybe you should not have made them the public face of their pet project and that bipartisan deal. Like Kelly, Kelly has to win re-election. Maggie Hassan, Raphael Warnock, why weren't they the tops of the ones negotiating a deal? You could have even just told your filibuster lovers, look, okay, I'm going to give you a bipartisan deal, but you're not going to be making the speeches. You're not going to be at the White House. It's going to be these people who, it's going to be Amy Klobuchar. She's my lady. Yeah. She's been there for me, and she's moderate, so she's going to be the one. But instead, you put it all in, and so now it looks like, okay, this face of the party says F you to voters.
It's not a good look.
But I know I know I've offended a lot of people with this, and I'm not trying to be. I don't know. It's one of those things of, I don't know how to tell people that it's like not raining, or we're like, I don't know how to mislead people about what happens, or that this is a better solution, or this is somehow AOC's fault, that
In
or
some capacity, we don't know.
that somehow this
We'll
is
come up with it later.
that they did not vote for, that we did not get voting rights. We're not getting, because I said there was either two options, right? Like either you say, okay, well, it's early 2021. These guys are not going to come around in the filibuster. We will never have the votes for voting rights because Republicans, we've known Republicans, we've known them, the current version, for more than a decade. They're not going to support this, not going to help pass a Stop Republicans from Cheating bill.
Yeah.
So we need to be upfront about that and then say the best way to win is to deliver huge things for everyone, like weighing great policy. And that does not include Republicans, because then it's gonna be a draw. Like, no, you're gonna create all these jobs, but then Republicans are gonna show up like, I created them too.
Yeah.
And we'll also get rid of critical race theory. So then and
bonus
open schools. Yeah. So the Build Back Better was the best chance of that. And so everything should have been on them. But then Manchin and Sinema, as part of while canoodling with Mitch McConnell, killed that also. So it's just now we're left with this sense of, okay, guys, all we can do, Republicans are fascists. Don't vote for the fascists. And I think anyone for whom that is compelling, for whom Democrats have effectively sold that argument to, are already loyal Democratic voters.
Yeah.
That is just reality. And I don't know how else, that is the reality. Anyone who's going to be able to understand. So I hate that in the analogy about, someone had posted this of like, well, it's just like, well, if you don't vote or you're for Republican, it's just like, oh, well, Democrats gave me a sandwich with pickles on it. I don't like pickles, so I'm going to stay home. It's like, well, it's not as clear cut for the voters who are trying to inspire to come out to the polls, or again, the white moderates who want some reason for you to vote for them. And as we saw with Youngling, you were not able to prove the thesis that it's not just Trump, that it's not about this. Yeah. What did Biden say? An epiphany that Republicans will peel off all this stuff once the Wicked Witch is dead and sing "Everybody Rejoice" and be good again. It is, they are fundamentally the problem. Trump was a symptom of it, and you actually have no way of beating people like Youngling. You just don't know how to do it. You have no strategy because he doesn't present as a fascist. So what do you think is an effective, you've talked about like selling policy or selling something. What do you think Democrats can do in the remaining year or so to?
I mean, it's going to be tough because they can't, I would say I think the only option really is to sit Manchin and Sinema down and be like, what are the few things that you will allow us to do, and get them done? Just like get something freaking done at this point. But get something on your resume, like, at this point. Like that's really, I think, all they can do. Just be like, okay, hat in hand, you're in charge. We put you in charge for reasons we're not really sure about now. But what will you allow to happen is like the only, I don't see any other way at this point, which sucks.
Ruben Gallego is most likely going to primary. Sinema, that's in 2024, but that's good news. He's not a deranged person. I know there was a theory, people resent this. People are they push back on, I think, and I'm not a stan of Amy Siskin, but she had heard that one of the things that Sinema's going to try to do potentially is challenge Biden in 2024, and everyone's like, no, that's crazy. How could she not realize that she has no chance? And it's like, well, you said this about Sanders, and he ran, and you said this about Warren, and these people didn't run, and you were dismissive of their, well, how could they possibly think they could win? So a lot of people run who, on the surface, I mean, come on, like that guy.
I mean, honestly, there's no accounting for taste. Is the one thing that I have learned about politics.
Well, every senator thinks they can be president. So I think like sabotage Biden, say he can't deliver, run as like some sort of, because then no one, because she probably does know that if by chance you beat Biden or Harris, something happens to Biden, and then it's like, okay, well, you've got to vote for her or Farmer Jones will come back. You've got to like, it's either her or Trump. She knows that maybe she could push that. I don't know this. It's obviously the speculation of someone said, but it is not an unreasonable idea that she is. It's interesting because people really believed that that's what Ted Cruz was going to do. Against Trump.
Oh, they all hate Ted Cruz now. He's a rhino now. Like, we now live in an era where Ted Cruz is no longer crazy enough for the Republican Party.
Oh yeah.
He is way too sane for them. They're done. They're over him. And that is really scary.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's an opportunist. He's opportunist, right? But the challenge of him is always that has been the same with Elise Stefanik. Like, they have no morals, but like, at least, it's like, can be changed. Like, well, when Elise Stefanik was saying these things against Trump, she believed like, okay, well, to succeed, you can't support grabbing women by the pussy. You can't do this. So it's not like she has a moral stance. It was like, this is what central casting is for a leader. So I will say these things. The same with Nikki Haley and others. And Cruz was doing that for a while as well. We had to bleeped out for a moment. But I was saying Cruz was doing this for a while. We're trying to sell, but there's no authenticity is what, in a weird way, Trump and Getz and Jordan and Marjorie Green and Boebert have, in that they are authentically the base. They're authentically the most awful people. And so what they do is just say it, and it's insane, but they believe it. And so Cruz is trying to find, like, and same with JD Vance and others, here's the awful thing I can say, but clearly I can't go that far. And clearly I can sanely, and they still believe that, like, I still need to say something, because it's the Younging the Younging model, right? Here's what I say that gets the, respectable, suburbanite conservatives over, and I'll say this. But he's trying to make that dance, and it doesn't work, and he gets labeled a rhino. And it couldn't happen to a better asshole, frankly.
Yeah. I find it really amusing personally.
Oh yeah, I mean, Trump had said some really awful transphobic comments during his terrible rally last night, and it just reminded me of how during the 2016 primary, I did know some trans people and even LGBT people in general who were, well, if someone has to win that primary, I'd rather it be Trump, because Cruz and even Rubio are so overtly, they believe it, and they're going to come after our issue. They'll come after gay marriage. Trump doesn't care. Trump is not an ideologue, and he was seen as a moderate. I think the fundamental mistake there is that he doesn't care enough to prioritize you as an enemy, but he's not an ally. So he's like,
and if it works for him to prioritize you as an enemy, that's what he's going to do.
Yeah. And so you should probably, when you are if you're a part of a marginalized group, you should make sure you're supporting either fellow members of that group, to be frank, or people who are really going to say, when it's the most inconvenient, when the crap hits the fan, my approval rating is 0.20, I'm going to still be behind you. I'm not going to be in the room and someone's going to say, oh, what about the Sister Soldier moment? You need that? Like, I'm never going to do that. And I think that's been the challenge for the party right now, the Democratic Party, where you don't have a lot of people with the skin in the game. So the folks with the skin in the game are more inclined to be like, well, maybe we should do a Sister Soldier moment. Maybe we should talk about things are too woke. So, we're going to talk about.
people think that's a good idea, but I really, I just don't, because I feel like that's playing right into, that's allowing them the right to set the conversation, and it's a ridiculous conversation, quite frankly.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, and even in the context, I've written about this before. Bill Clinton was not the president; he was just some rando governor of a small state. And even though as a white man, he certainly he certainly had more kind of power in the grand scheme of things than Jesse Jackson, a black man, but in the sense of guy nobody knew of, and Jesse Jackson, head of Push, and had been almost the nominee the year before, it would be seen as if this small guy punching up. But here, there's no way. Now they're asking that the president of the United States, basically rip, some feminist thinkers or racial justice thinkers, often women of color, who are like some random that no one knows, and imply that this person has some grand power over, what young people are thinking or whatever, and that they, are somehow just as poisonous as the Proud Boys or other groups. And so, and that is a fundamental, obviously a fundamental misstep. But that's what desperate people do. I mean, and it's interesting that we are, more than a year after the insurrection, and it's not about what Republicans can, who from MAGA can they throw under the bus. And it's not Wonkette, it's not March of the Green, their stars rising. And for us, it is who a part of these people can we sacrifice, despite, again, Biden saying, I have your back. And that's a tremendous risk. I think that there is
absolutely,
there was a poll recently that showed Biden like underwater with Hispanic voters. That was when he was like 33% in one poll. And I saw someone reject it out of hand. Like it could not be true, because Democrats always win Hispanic voters. I was like, okay, well, that's very dangerous sentiment. It can reflect and when Biden was underperforming Hispanic voters in the primary, I think losing them, especially working class Hispanics in Nevada, to Sanders, everyone was like, no. Once Biden wins, everything will reset. He will immediately have somehow Hillary Clinton or Obama numbers among that group. And that didn't turn out for many reasons. So, taking your demos for granted is a problem. Republicans are doing that. They're like, how can we keep keeping our demo fat and happy with our rhetoric and so forth, and really listening to them. I mean, a lot of and sometimes not listen, some of the listening is not necessarily things we want to hear. It's very easy to sort of look at the postmortems and say, oh, defund the police was a problem. But even if the same postmortem said, here's where you kind of lost working class Hispanics in Texas because they were terrified of future shutdowns, and Republicans were promising, no, we're never shut down anything. You're not going to lose your jobs. And they didn't want to do that. Well, that's
because that's not the answer that they wanted.
Yeah. And, you are writing it. I mean, and let's say to go back to that, and I guess go back to the Virginia thing. My question for you is like, how do you, because you have the really interesting line about like, making Virginia dumber again, and also like spreading COVID everywhere. But if that's the weird position we're in, right? So if like when these Republican governors do these ridiculous, no mask mandates or this sort of thing, we don't obviously want people to die. We don't want it to we don't want basically be graveyards in Virginia and in Florida. But if that's not the case, if it's not a noticeable disaster, right? And it was arguably somewhat noticeable last year, but it didn't affect DeSantis's numbers. If it's not a disaster, then by November you have this perception that we're free in these states, and we didn't your kid didn't have to wear a mask and you were able to go to a restaurant and everything was all right. Like, how do you respond to that? Like, what is the...
I mean, honestly, right now we need to be looking. I was looking earlier at Reddit. The nursing subreddit is horrifying.
Mhm.
Like, they're basically like, people do not realize that the entire healthcare system is crumbling. And I feel like we're so like, even I'm very separated from that, and like, there are a lot of reasons why I should not be emotionally separate from that right now. Like, it is, they're so overwhelmed right now, and like, just as they were before, that they're like, dropping out of the profession in like very large numbers. We're not going to have like hospitals to take care of people when they are sick, even the people who can afford to go to them. Like, I feel like, there's a lot of urgency there that is not necessarily being projected into the world. Like, people aren't really fully understanding it.
Yeah, we should
I'm not
focus
sure
more
how to
on
do that. I
them.
think that that's
Well, sort of like Republicans did with the parents. Here's these
yeah,
angry parents who are going to give them a voice, and you feel as if these
yeah,
healthcare workers are. To be honest, I feel like I hear more from healthcare workers who are upset that they had to get vaccinated.
yeah. Oh yeah, no, they've been amplified. I think that we need to do more to amplify the voices of healthcare workers who are like completely crushed right now,
Mhm.
because it's really super, it's disturbing. Like, it's sad.
Yeah, I mean, my concern has always been we live in the country that we live in, and it's just the shutdowns are in a way almost it's more the most rational COVID policies are like
Mhm.
are more invasive in certain ways, and obviously raising someone's taxes, who was most people don't know. A lot of the
Yeah.
wealthier people complain about it, don't notice, and anything having to do with climate change, which obviously we
Well,
hit
because it's immediate and it's your life. And, Democrats don't like to do policies that are like, it's immediate and it's your life, because they like to do incrementalism so that like you don't notice that the things are happening when they're happening. But like, that's sort of hard to campaign on. It's not as immediate as like, these people are going to teach your kids to hate you and we're going to stop them, or you're not going to have to wear a mask to the store.
Yeah, I glad that I either recovered or did not have.
It's not as bad as it was.
You were in, AOC was there for 8 minutes and got,
Yeah.
COVID. So it is out there. I thought I had it earlier and I was about to get tested, and just clearly it's one of those things where I almost wished it was COVID and not an oat allergy, because I don't want to have to give up granola. But
Oh no, are you allergic to granola?
it's very clear, like when I have it, I have my nice little bowl of Trader Joe's pecan pralines thing, and the next day I'm like, oh my God, I like sneezing all the time, my eyes are red, and like my throat.
I've never heard of that being a reaction to granola.
I looked it up, like, oh, you can't, those are some of and even fatigue. So it's a lot of that. And then
So you can't have any porridge.
No. I'm sorry. You can have no. It was selling a Grimm's fairy tale. That was Robyn. I could have
porridge for breakfast every day. I have the strawberries and cream porridge.
No, it looks that way. I think my wife is going to have to make more of her holiday Chex Mix that I was often using, that I used the end of as cereal one day because we had no other cereal. The Chex Mix and poured it into a bowl and put some milk over it, and then I didn't die. So, I just feel my body is failing me. That's what happens with middle age. You just get these things of just like we used to be invincible, and now, Well, we were going
I've
to talk.
never had any nostrils to speak of, so like I've had nose situations my whole life anyway. So, like,
yeah. We were going to talk about this awful situation, the hostage situation,
which is tough.
and
I do not feel like I'm trying to read up as much as I can on the. I feel like I probably should have known more about the Afia Siddiqui. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Situation before now, I wasn't really familiar. It does. I mean,
it was a
it's
horrible.
horrifying what happened. It's also, her situation is also like, I don't feel like I know enough about it to weigh in, and people certainly didn't know enough about it, I think, yesterday to weigh in, because there were people being like, oh, it's her brother, but it wasn't actually her brother. It was like, and like Muslim people were saying, no, that's like, it's not her. He's calling her his sister, but it's not a literal thing.
Well, I mean, that's like just a general black thing as well. Not even they're black, but like just you've never watched like any black we
like they're all like looking up like, let's find out about her brother, and everyone's like, no, it's not her literal brother.
Yeah,
so a very odd.
It's just horrifying. I am glad that everyone got out. They were not online, but the anti-Semitism is an issue in this nation, and most of the groups hating each other. I think one thing that is what is it? Love each other as brothers or perish as fools, as MLK said. It seems to be a very we wish that there was a better solution than violence all the time, but it seems that is what we wind up resorting to. But
it's just a horrifying situation all over. I don't,
Yes, I know a lot of my Jewish friends who are very scared and terrified. I think that's part of what's important, is just when any other general, and obviously people are afraid when there's school shootings or mass shootings at a supermarket or anything, but I think when you're in a marginalized,
you feel targeted.
Yes, you feel like that's coming or it's being waived, and it's something that is regrettable, and I certainly feel terrible that was what was happening yesterday. But fortunately, everyone is okay. But obviously, not okay because you.
That's traumatizing. I don't know.
Traumatizing. It's like the like on TV shows where someone gets a concussion every week. And it's like, well, no, I think you can't survive, like on the old Smallville show, like Lana, someone would always get knocked out. And it's like, well, no, she's brain damaged. You can't keep getting knocked out each week. And so similar to like, in a weird way with our lives, like trauma is not something that you kind of, collective trauma has long-term devastating effects. And so it's not something to be like, oh yeah, everything's okay. It is not. Well, what do you have going on for next for tomorrow that people might be looking forward to?
I am going to look into doing something on the nursing subreddit, just because like I was like, wow, I don't think I totally appreciated the degree to which these people are like being put upon right now. I mean, I understood it, but I don't think like I fully grasped it, And how about you?
I'm sure I have some King stuff going on, and I will look doing something about the Portland police crazy right-wing Proud Boy training slide that had of like beating up hippies and stuff like that and glorifying violence. And it's always, whenever this happens, the mayor here says, well, this doesn't reflect the police department that saw this slide and didn't complain, because police are vocal, known for never vocalizing their complaints about things. So it just seems to me, it's like, well, they're pretty vocal when they're upset about something. So it seems like when these racist things come out, it's fair to assume that they were not a mass. There was not a mass walkout. There's a mass walkout over vaccine mandates. So there's not a mass walkout when like, wait a minute, you're trying to train me with these race. I am offended. I'm out of here. So that's what we have going on. And yes, hopefully something fun.
I know we need to find something cheerful. It's really hard, but like people don't know how hard it is to find cheerful news. Like just because like, all of the uplifting news that you find is always like, but it's actually really depressing because it's like, oh, these, Walmart people are getting a canned food drive for each other. No,
While their boss goes
that
into
is
space.
not actually every time I read like good news, I'm like, oh no, this is actually really sad. And it's tough.
That's what I always, whenever wealthy people like head of Walmart or Amazon are always like, oh, I have all this money. What should I do with all my wealth? And it was always like, you could pay your employees more. That's not out of the realm of possibility.
It's a crazy idea.
I love a good museum, but you
Yeah.
could also just pay your employees more. Try that.
But
All right.
also then they could go to space.
Which is probably vastly overrated. I find like I'd rather just watch it.
I don't even like getting on an airplane. So like I have no interest in going to space. I did want to go to space camp just because honestly, I was a sucker for advertising as a kid, and I really just wanted to go on that like spinny thing that they showed at the end of every television show, because like for some reason they just constantly advertise space camp. At the end of every episode of Punky Brewster, it was like, you can go to space camp, and I was like, I cannot. And I'm not sure why, but I can't.
I don't blame you. Well, thank you, Robyn. We will connect next week.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Bye, y'all. Bye, Stephen.